All right, miserable accursed. It is Thursday, February the 20th, and we are back. We're back to talk all things politics today. Deb Hutton, Scott Reid, and myself. Jordan Leichnitz will wander out of Morocco at some point and rejoin us, and we're looking forward to that. In the meantime, we got lots to talk about today. We've got developments in the Ontario campaign.
That is a lie. You're telling lies to these people. We do not have lots to talk about. This campaign does not offer fruit.
You know, Scott Reid, you've been bad-mouthing me all over the place. And I'm going to tell you something. If you've got something to say to me, have the balls to say it to my face.
All right. I love it.
All right. And we're going to talk federal politics. Big announcement yesterday from Mark Carney. Conservatives immediately saw potential and jumped on it. So we'll talk about that and how it's going to play. Let's start with today's polling, which is, as usual, brought to us by Enbridge Gas, reliable natural gas to heat your homes and power our economy. Okay, Kyla and Relay Research have been out in the field again last night, and we find exactly what we found yesterday. Absolutely no change. We are looking at 47 for Ford and the PCs, 27 for Crombie and the Liberals, and 18 for Styles and the NDP, 8 for Mike Schreiner and the Greens, and there was no movement in any of the underliers as well. So that's what we got. And I suspect that's what we have unless something happens to change that. I could see Ford drifting down a couple of points just on just on wear and tear of the campaign, but I don't see anything fundamental underneath there that's going to change things unless something happens.
Does Schreiner win his seat with 8%, or is it impossible to know because it's such a specific?
I think it's super. Well, their votes like super efficient, like it's one or two ridings really, where it's concentrated. So he probably does. I think the seat projection models are showing that he would still win on these type of numbers. Okay. So let's talk about the campaign day yesterday. First of all, Deb has been alluding to this in a number of her do-overs, blessings, curses, various things. But some of the media are now starting to make a little bit of a thing about it, at least on social media, that Ford has not met with the media as of yesterday in 9 days. And I presume today will make it 10 days. Obviously not paying any price for that in the polls. It's a risk, though, to do it. In a sense, it's a risk, obviously, to do media, but it's kind of in years gone by, nobody would ever thought you could do something like this in an election campaign. Deb, certainly, I bet in 1995, or 1999, let's take 99 is a better example, it never occurred to you that Mike Harris could go 10 days and not meet the media in the campaign.
Well, but we did make a decision we wouldn't do the Toronto Star editorial board. And people would have said nobody could do that, biggest, circulation newspaper in this province. And we did. But as I've said the last few days, I think it's a bit unnecessary. If I were the premier, I'd probably feel a little annoyed about it because I think inherent in it is the notion that Doug will screw up if he's in a scrum. And, I have more faith in him, I think. So while I get the strategy and it's very safe, and as you just said, David, it's not hurting him in the polls, I think the more days you have a process story like that, the more potential only, that it actually does hurt him a little bit. People start to say, well, why is this a deal? Why are we, why does he not want to talk to people? That being said, I think I think he's doing a scrum in the next 24 hours. Keep in mind, tomorrow, I believe, is Washington. So, he will be talking to some Ontario media, and that'll at least stop the decline in the day count that the Liberals have going on this. But I just don't love it. I get it, but I think you could do a little bit.
So they have a shitload of money, and they're rolling out new ads, positive and negative, in the next day or two. And surely, Deb, one of the things it does, and Scott, is really demonstrate how the balance of power in campaigns has shifted from earned media to paid media. You couldn't have made this decision in 1999 with Harris because the earned media really mattered.
Yeah.
And now you can disappear from the pages of the newspapers, and you can, compensate for that with a deluge of advertising.
When you think about the visuals you've seen in this campaign. I mean, I think we can all pick them up, whether we watch traditional TV on occasion, CP24 in Toronto. You do see them. And what I see with the premier is flags. I see hard hats. I see lots of smiling faces around them. When I see Bonnie, I see her bus. I see her wearing red. I see her with smaller groups around her. And Marit, I mean, I think about Marit, she's just smiling and talking. You don't think about what she's saying necessarily, but I think you have those visuals. So there's been some earned media. I think the opposition just haven't found what their message is that's resonating.
Yeah, I think there's a bigger picture fact. I think a bunch of different things. One, this is a choice that campaigns can make now. And as you say, David, they couldn't make in the past because you were being judged as a candidate in a campaign on the basis of what was being said about you in earned media, and that would genuinely and directly affect what voters thought. Now that connection is no longer as clear. And so campaigns had the option of just ignoring earned media. And, that might be good for campaigns in terms of increasing the amount of discipline a campaign can display, in terms of de-risking a bunch of days during a 28-day campaign. But it's manifestly bad for the democratic health of our jurisdiction. And you can go as small as an example as how yesterday Marit Styles spent her whole day doing earned media interviews, and how that probably did not create a ripple in the pond of the political vote intent of this province. So she spent the whole day trying to push back on Crombie and the appeal to the NDP in these many earned media interviews. And I think you'd be hard pressed to pretend that it wasn't a wasted day. On the other hand, it's worrying. And so that's the case for not bothering with earned media and just going paid or owned media. But then, you look at, and I'm sorry to go really 3,000 feet, but you look at Donald Trump yesterday declaring Zelensky to be a dictator, the absurdity, the prideful, boastful mistruth of that, and how that will be believed because earned media doesn't have the power, doesn't have the ability to check that anymore. He can influence what more people believe by saying something and then blasting it than earned media can by trying to correct it or fact check it. And so I don't think it's healthy for us to celebrate the diminution of earned media and the fundamental check and balance that it provides in a democratic country.
I agree with that, but there's 7 days to go in the campaign. So,
but it's helping you win campaigns. I'd probably make this if my job was not to fret on the sidelines about the health of democracy, but if it was running the campaign, I'd probably be doing the same thing as Kory.
The Ontario Real Estate Association has been telling us that Ontario's housing crisis is pushing the dream of home ownership further and further out of reach for too many Ontario families, and that municipal development charges, or MDCs, are a big part of this problem. MDCs are intended to pay for growth-related costs that accompany new housing construction. Think roads, utilities, and water infrastructure. But increasingly, we've seen many municipalities treat MDCs like a source of general revenue, placing an unfair tax burden on home buyers by adding up to $135,000 to the price of an average home. Ouch! Maria understands that municipalities have struggled to keep up with the pace of growth. But with billions of dollars in revenue from MDCs remaining unspent, it is Ontario's homeowners who are on the hook for these excessive costs that are making it even harder to own a home. Maria has offered solutions, like allowing municipalities to offer water and wastewater as they do energy, amortized across the user base. Whatever the final solution may be, Ontario's municipalities must find approaches to generating revenue that does not involve passing costs down to consumers. To read Oria's plan on how to save the dream of home ownership, read their full election platform, A Home for Everyone 2025, at oria.com/platform.
Okay, so I thought that Bonnie Crombie had a good day on the campaign trail yesterday. She did what I had hoped she would do, not remotely suggesting that she did, because I said They obviously had this in the plans for works, but they must have seen the same things in the data that we were seeing, and they shifted to affordability and tax cuts. Scott, what'd you think of how that announced?
I like the strategy. Obviously, David, when Herle speaks, campaigns listen because they did adjust. They moved off of their focus on the NDP and Liberal appeal and went to tax cuts. And I think that makes some sense, trying to carve that 2-3% of the soft PC vote. But I have to admit, I was puzzled by the intensity of the Balls remark because it obscured that. So if you look at the coverage, you don't see a lot of talk about the tax cut. Instead, you see the attack on Ford, and maybe that's good enough. Maybe just her throwing fire at Ford. Ford's off of the campaign trail. Marit's in a studio somewhere doing an interview. So maybe that's good enough. It carries the news media, keeps her name out there. Maybe that helps enough. But I didn't like it for two reasons. One, and it's got nothing to do with balls. I don't care if she says balls. You can say balls, nuts, blue cherries, Daryl and his other brother Daryl, chin music, call it whatever the fuck you want. But what I didn't like was that it brought up the Oshawa candidate again, because that was what the reaction was to it. So you're seeing that issue gets recycled because she's teeing off of it. And secondly, I thought strategically we didn't get as much tax cut and we got more anatomy. So I think I would have changed that balance.
Deb, what do you think of Crombie's take?
So I agree with Scott. And I struggled with why she was so fierce on a topic, as Scott said, you don't want to actually continue to talk about. Now, I'm assuming the strategy is to show that she's got strength and that she's solid. But I don't know. Advanced polls are open today. So people, given the weather we've had in Toronto in particular, people will probably go out to vote today, tomorrow, and Saturday, just in case there's a storm next Thursday, if they want to vote. And I didn't get it. I was like, who are you appealing to? And why, as Scott said, would you want to get angry on a topic that isn't great? And her handling of, what has she got now? 3 candidates who's put their foot in their mouth, albeit some of them in the past. Why would you want to highlight that? I don't get it.
Yeah, that was my beef. But you know what? The day probably worked for her. If we look at it, like I just got the Star on my doorstep. Imagine that. I still get a physical newspaper every morning, and I look at it because I want to see the Family Circus cartoon. And there's she's the picture, she's the headline. And I know it's a Star, but still, she sort of drove the conversation. So maybe it works. I don't think it was a strategy, Deb. I think that's Bonnie. I think if you look at her in the debate, she gets hot. I think sometimes when Ford comes up, she goes to 11 instead of 7. But so I don't know that it was a strategic move. I'm guessing it's just an accidental, instinctual thing. But in spite of itself, maybe it worked for her yesterday.
But the thing is, if I didn't drill down into everything, if I was a normal person yesterday, I didn't get tax cuts. I got tax cuts this morning when I was doing all my reading and my prep to chat with you guys. I did not get tax cuts yesterday.
Well, if you're doing prep, you're not a normal person because
well, that's my point.
We don't do prep.
So
we're not normal.
So yesterday,
you're not even a normal panelist.
Yeah.
No, but I look at the media in the morning before we chat in a different way, either because of my radio show or because of my chat with you guys. Yesterday, I get home, the tutor's been here, there's basketball, we're trying to, cram dinner in like a lot of families, and all I got was balls. Did not get tax cuts.
I'm trying to make family dinner here, and all I get in both ears are balls.
It was exactly that, Scott.
I mean, come on. We're trying to sit down and have a family meeting.
That's life at the Hutton Hudak household.
Okay. Well, if you don't like her day, Deb, how does the campaign get up, look at 17 points province-wide, 15 points in the city of Toronto, 1 week left to go, and say, let's go off and do a couple of radio interviews?
So when I saw that was Marit's schedule yesterday, the day before, I thought, you know what? That's probably not a bad strategy because she's trying to hang on to Toronto seats. And her message hasn't been getting out there, so try something different and see if you can get some media, earned media that way. The problem is, again, normal people, I don't think she broke through yesterday. very limited coverage, and I couldn't even tell you what her message was. So I thought it was a decent strategy. I think it was, I think Scott said earlier, a wasted day for her. And there aren't days to waste for either of them, Bonnie or Marit.
Well, if you're going to do something like that, surely you have to have a plan to say something in the interviews that will break through to the broader discourse, and not just be that's the only the people that heard that interview heard what you were doing. And again, I heard no message that broke through from that, Scott.
For sure. And I don't know if it was the right choice to default for their campaign, to default to an earned media day, do a bunch of sit down interviews, do radio, do TVO. I don't know if that was the right decision or not tactically. It may have been the best available option, but if you're going to do it, like you say, don't give me the recycled Liberal NDP switcher line, literally from Jack Layton's time. And I wonder if that's where there's a little lack of creativity on the part of the campaign team here, where, you know, it's kind of steeped in NDP lore that when you're hit with that kind of Liberal squeeze play, what you say. And what she said, and I watched the TVO interview, what she said was, look, that is such an arrogant, Liberal-like approach, telling voters what they should do with their vote. We believe that people should choose who they believe represents their values, and if they do, then they'll vote NDP. I mean, I remember in the 2004, Jack Layton saying exactly that, and that's 20 years ago. And you're talking to fewer people through media channels that are connecting with a lot fewer people. And I just don't think that vanilla message, that familiar message, that unconfrontational, unstirring a message is something you can afford to do in the situation you're in. She needed to say something more. I think she has to face the unpleasant choice of saying, look, NDP, rank and file, if you're out there, hear me now. The bat signal is in the sky and the Joker is on the loose. And if you do not vote NDP, right, they may bring the Batcave down. Like, I think the situation's that parallel. So they have to confess to weakness in order to say, I'm calling everybody to save us. And that means you've got to flood into those ridings south of Bloor. Vote NDP. Do not flirt with the Liberals. Do not think about not voting. We need you. And I know the risk is that you look like you're calling yourself a drowning man, but you're a drowning man. So I think you have to call for the life preserver.
Greetings, Canadian Political Pod listener. I'm your narrator, Gary, an artificial intelligence-generated voice. Exciting and serious sounding is what we typed in the AI voiceover input field. And boom, Gary exists. Hey, do you know what's not artificial? Not even one bit? The highly influential audiences air quotes media podcasts offer to its advertisers. And I say that with all the sincerity a machine learning, data-optimized, predictive network of interconnected neural nodes can muster. Whether your ad message is on Curse of Politics, the Hurly-Burly, Hotel Pacifico, or the brand new Race to Replace, you will be reaching cabinet ministers, members of parliament, the political class, the C-suite, and corporate Canada, leading journalists, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. People saying this is a unique political moment is underselling it. Policy is under scrutiny. A party leader is being voted on. The Ontario election is underway. There will be a new prime minister. And then there's the guy living in the White House who calls us the 51st state. Does anyone remember another time like this? I'm instantly scouring millions of data points to answer my own rhetorical question. No, you do not. This is when you need to get your message to the decision makers. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com. You'll be dealing with Jill and Todd, who are real, not artificial at all people, and generally very friendly. Well, Jill is anyway. We're still deciding about Todd.
Scott, do you have a do-over?
Yeah. All right. Well, since it looks like Costa Rican rebels have taken Herle hostage, let's just continue with you and me, Deb. My do-over on the day is something that we've talked about here already. It's been the subject of our short episode, and that is I think the NDP have to come to a core strategic decision. I think the the do-over is yesterday didn't work. I think you have to look at that at face value. Even arguably a misstep or an unintended move on the part of Crombie overshadowed your day. And so I think they're going to have to spend the weekend deciding in that last stretch how specific, how desperate, how, for the love of God, save us now, SOS. They decide to become as a campaign. And I don't think they can avoid the decision any longer. So I know that my do-over is just a long extension of what I was saying before, but I do think for them, these are dangerous days.
So we haven't had a chance to talk about federal politics. I did think the Carney announcement yesterday was interesting, his sort of budget balance in 3 years and change the way that accounting is done so that we separate out operating from capital. The question, of course, being, I think, from my perspective, like what is in that capital basket that allows you to say that you're going to balance the operating budget. So, I mean, in a generic sense, I like the Carney announcement. I do worry, quite bluntly, that it will be just a tool to make it look as though he has greater command of the budget and undo a lot of the massive Trudeau spending of days gone by. My do-over, though, is that I thought Pierre's reaction, while it was swift and had a lot of great points, got into the weeds a little bit too much. Yeah. And I just think there could have been a very emotional reaction that continued to tie Carney to Trudeau and the belief that Liberals, no offense, will ever actually put the finances of the country first and foremost in their efforts. They just can't help but spend. He got into very strong language about this is, like a shyster type move. But I just thought the reaction, while it was swift and there were good points, could have been better. I would have done it slightly differently.
Just let me pick up on that because we didn't talk about Carney. So I'll just say a couple quick things. And one, I agree with you on Poilievre, maybe in a slightly different way. Oddly enough, I didn't even mind the shyster stuff because I think driving that idea of hang on, someone's changing the goalpost to tell you that every kick they make is a field goal. I thought there's some wisdom in that. But I've had a rule since I worked for Paul when he was finance minister, which is that if you're issuing a political statement that includes the phrase generally accepted accounting principles, you're fucking up. And that the conservative statement literally talked about generally accepted accounting principles and the great wisdom, the great insight, the great genius of modern conservative communication is their street level, it's street talk, it's lunch bucket appeal. And so when you're now finding yourself in the position where you're grasping for technocratic terms as a means of critiquing your opponent, something has flipped here in terms of that script. On Carney, I'll just say two things. One, I like the impulse of differentiating himself from Trudeau, which I think yesterday was intended to be in broad terms. I'm going to take a more responsible, more middle-of-the-road approach. I want to be able to cut taxes for people in the middle class. In order to do that, we're going to have to execute a genuine program review. We're going to have to save in a bunch of places. I know that, so I thought that broad approach makes sense. I think that that's sensible, even if it's just shielding against Poilievre. But I do worry about the whole operating versus capital. I've heard this debate for years. It's held very often. I worry it's more of an intellectual academic distinction than a political distinction. And when it comes on the same day that the prime minister announces high-speed rail, where you have to you're forced to then actually think, well, hang on a second. Is that unnecessary spending that is something that we would all love to have, but we don't know if we can afford the billions and billions and billions in the years and years and years it will take? Is that an example of dubious spending, or is that an example of capital spending, which is an investment? And so even the backdrop of Trudeau's announcement, I thought, brought into sharp relief the obvious issue, which is, well, what's capital and what's operating? And oh my God, aren't we going to get into tinfoil hat territory as we distinct, or at least green cap accounting hat as we try to make this distinction? So I'll be interested to see more. I worry a little bit that there's a vulnerability that's been created there that if I was the Conservatives, I would pound away at.
Yeah, and again, I just thought they had good points, as you said, but could have sharpened it up a little bit. And your eyes glaze over, right? Operating capital, accounting principles. So I just think it was an interesting strategy on the Liberal part and a good rapid response on the Conservative war room, but I think it could have been sharper. I'm actually hoping to talk to Polyev today or tomorrow on News Talk and chat with him a little bit about it. Do you
Funny,
have a
when I
cursor?
host News Talk, Polyev declines my invitations to come on and talk. Now, I just wonder, he'll come and talk to you and Jerry Agar, but he doesn't talk to me. That's a goddamn funny thing, eh?
Yeah, some people have really great judgment.
It's because, well, some people suggest I lack charm. All right, you got a blessing or curse?
I really don't. I guess a blessing to everybody who's going to go out and vote is the best I've got for you because it is, as I said earlier, advanced voting day. I've got my card. It finally came. Thanks, Canada Post. No thanks, Canada Post. Today, tomorrow, and Saturday. Premier's off to Washington. So I think it's an interesting juxtaposition of people kind of coming to a conclusion of where they're going to put their vote.
All right. Well, I'm breaking format. My curse is directed at all the many Toronto drivers who decide to go down a side street. You know what? You don't know how to fucking drive. And I can't tell you how much time I've spent the last 48 hours stuck on a side street, being forced to back up blindly because somebody decided that they would take their Yukon and drive down the middle of a street that is now about as wide as a matchbook cover. I know that there's this debate happening in Toronto, sorry to be so Toronto-centric, but and there's this debate happening is this a sign that the city is falling apart, that we can't remove snow quicker than 3 weeks, versus, hey, you know what? It's a ton of snow. We live in a big city. There's no place to put it. But I will say this, all you asshole drivers, take a bus, take a streetcar, walk, stay home. I don't care, but don't get behind the wheel. You don't know what you're doing. Good folk like me who grew up in the country, we know how to drive in these conditions. Rest of you, piss off.
Scott, where you and I grew up, two different places, but very similar, there were no cars parked on the street. There were no sidewalks and front lawns that were 15 to 25 feet wide. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, but where I grew up, the cars were parked on the front yard. They were broken down. The tires were off. They were lifted. It was like, oh my, what happened to your 67 Skylark? And so it's a whole different vibe there in rural Ontario.
And of course,
All
we
right.
should be cursing David's internet. Hopefully it's back tomorrow and we will have our team minus Jordan back together.
I'd like to thank our original sponsor, Aurea, and our polling sponsor, Enbridge, for their support today. I want to thank you people that are watching and listening to this podcast. All right, we'll see you all tomorrow morning. Take care of yourselves.